So I want to share with you my experiences with childbirth and where I feel like I needed a doula, or where a doula would have been very helpful. So with both of my children, I had unintentional, unassisted home births. And let me explain how that happened. It turns out that I am what some people refer to as a fast birther. So with my first delivery, from the time my water broke to the time I delivered my son was 5 hours. And I didn't experience any contractions until 2 hours before I delivered him. And having spoken to my mom, her shortest delivery was 16 hours. So I was expecting something along those lines when my water broke. I did not, however, talk to my dad's side, which is my dad's mom. It turns out that she had very quick labors. As a matter of fact, she had an accidental delivery where she couldn't make it to the hospital on time. So that's where I get that from. But I didn't realize that until after I had my children. So my husband actually delivered both of our children by accident. So with my son, with my first birth, my sister-in-law came by to give me acupuncture. She's an acupuncturist, and my contractions, they were very irregular. They would be 7 minutes apart, then 14 minutes apart, then 5 minutes apart, then 8 minutes apart. And then all of a sudden, it just felt like I was having one long contraction. And so I was told by the midwives, we were working with a hospital that had midwives. And I was told by them, when your contractions are 2 to 3 minutes apart consistently, that's when you call. I never reached that. I never had a consistent 2 to 3 minutes apart. And so I was very confused. Not only that, but I wasn't expecting to have a child that fast. So once we realized, like, hey, I think the baby's coming, we called the midwives and we were making plans to leave the house, but I didn't want to leave while I was having an active contraction. And as I mentioned, the last part of my labor was just one long contraction. And I felt like if we left the house, I was going to have the baby on the side of the road. And I was right. It was about a 40-minute drive to the hospital. I imagine my husband would have been trying to drive as carefully as he could. But yeah, the baby came soon after we called the hospital. As a matter of fact, the car was running and the door was open when I was giving birth in my husband's home office. And so my sister-in-law was there, and it was very fortunate that she happened to be there. I would have never thought that I'd be comfortable in a situation with somebody I didn't know super well, but she had been in birthing situations before as an acupuncturist, and she had a very sort of pleasant presence. And she was very honored to be there, and she was very humble. So my husband would say, hey, I need you to bring me this. I need you to bring me that. I need you to get this. And she would just go do it. Hey, I need you to call this person. I need you to call that person. And she would just do it. And then also, a good way to reduce pain during childbirth is to press on pressure points. And so my sister-in-law, when a contraction would come, I'd say, oh, I need somebody to press on the lower part of my back. And so she would press as hard as she could, and it significantly reduced the pain. There were points near when I actually pushed my son out where both her and my husband were pressing as hard as they could on my lower back, and it helped a lot. And so, we had a doctor on FaceTime walking us through it. My husband had previously read an emergency childbirth delivery book, so fortunately he had some context as to what was going to happen. And I had a successful, healthy delivery. I had a birth coach or somebody training us in childbirth prior to this instance, and so my sister-in-law called her, and she came to the house as fast as she could to make sure that we were okay, that everything was going well, because she had sat in on many home births. That was actually her specialty. And so when all was said and done, I was able to breastfeed. The baby came out super healthy. We cut the cord. We did all the things. I was able to pass the placenta, and then we drove to the hospital and to make sure that everybody was okay and do all the tests and things like that. And it was actually surprisingly a very positive experience. Everybody was bringing positive energy to the room, and I had such joy. It was it was such a joyful occasion. I remember hearing my son cry for the first time and just feeling this rush of endorphins and immediately falling in love with him and just having that time to, do my first breastfeeding and things like that without anybody trying to push an intervention or anything like that. Like, I didn't have the stress of trying to implement my birth plan at a hospital with all the policies. Like, I was able to do it my way, essentially, even though what happened was not intentional. And so overall, it was a very positive experience. And in that situation, my sister-in-law acted as a doula. It wasn't intentional. She's not professionally trained as a doula. She's trained in other areas and she has been in childbirth before. But her support of my husband is what a birthing doula might do in a situation. And also with my birth coach coming, she was able to make sure that I was okay, essentially. And she was able to reassure me. She helped me get the baby latch so I could do my first breastfeeding before we left to drive to the hospital. And that is also something that a doula would do. So we had really good support. And that is something that you want to be aware of, that you might need. Even if you're not having an unassisted home birth, having someone to support you so that you're not trying to figure everything out, you're not trying to answer a bunch of questions, is super helpful so that you can just focus on the moment and maybe even have a very positive experience in the birthing process. So when we got to the hospital, there were a lot of things done, and there were a lot of things that my husband and I, we wanted done a certain way. For example, we didn't want our son removed from our presence. We wanted to see what everybody was doing with him at all times. And we were informed prior to going there that that was fine. Everything that they needed to do, unless there was some emergency, could be done in the room with us. And so occasionally a nurse would come in and they'd just be ready to wheel the baby out. And my husband would say, hey, can you do that in here? Or can I go with you? And me being exhausted from giving birth, like, I just wasn't firing on all cylinders. And so it was nice having someone else in the room who knew what we had decided, to be willing to push back and say, hey, like, this is what we want. This is what we asked for. And so a doula can do that for you as well. If you don't have a partner or a husband or whoever who's willing to be that person to challenge what's happening or to advocate for you, a doula will do that for you. So in that instance, I had that support, and ultimately, we were able to get all the tests done. Everyone was healthy, and eventually we were allowed to go back home.